at Dog Park, we got people coming from that live by Connor Prairie using that dog park. It's super popular. Yeah.
Thank you, Tracy. I will say that again. The August 21st, 2020 Fisheries Board of Health will now come to order. Note that I think, Lindsay, you're on. We do have someone taking minutes online for this meeting, and we'll record any votes or any additional topics that we discuss. Are there any announcements or presentations, Chris?
Nope.
Seeing none, we'll move to the consent agenda. Is there a motion to approve the consent agenda?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor, please say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Consent agenda passes. We have no resolutions, so we will move now to the regular items, and I will turn the rest of the agenda items over to our Director of Public Health, Monica Heltz. Monica? Do you want me to tee up the first one?
I think the first item on the agenda has to do with the CARES Act reimbursement.
Yeah.
The first item on the agenda has to do with CARES Act reimbursement and funding, and I believe our city controller is going to present on
Yes.
that.
So Lisa Bradford, our city controller, is just going to give everyone an update regarding kind of the financial implications of the public health department and the actions taken to date. So I'm going to turn it over to Lisa to just give an update on our ability to recoup costs associated with our response to the COVID pandemic.
All right, for the record, Lisa Bradford, City Controller. So just a quick update, as you guys are well aware, the Congress passed the CARES Act, which then the state allowed reimbursement from cities. The city of Fishers has reimbursement available from the state of just a little over $3 million. And so to date, the health department spend has been about $718,000, and our first official request for CARES reimbursement was $646,000. So, and that was approved by the Indiana Finance Authority this week, and we received that actually today in our bank account. So really net health department expenses are only about $73,000 right now, and that doesn't include some potential reimbursements for supplies that we didn't throw into this first request. But the first reimbursement really covered the Qualtrics software, the setup that allows people to sign up for
Lisa,
testing.
could you hold on for one second? Anyone who's online that's listening, if you could mute your phone or computer, that would be very helpful. Thank you. Go ahead, Lisa.
Okay, yep. So like I said, the first included the Qualtrics, which is about $317,000, and then the first two rounds of payments to Mid-America Clinical Laboratories for the testing, which was about $329,000. So here in the next couple of weeks, we'll submit our other round of reimbursement for testing that was just paid, which is around $290,000. So operating at a pretty good margin right now in the health department.
So to date, we've covered almost all of our response costs associated with COVID through the CARES Act that came in through the state allotment, which we have up to $3 million. Can you touch on the other avenues of revenue or resources that are also available that we're exploring?
Yes, so in addition to the CARES Act, there is also FEMA money available. And so FEMA money is 75%, 25%. So basically you have to outlay 25%. You can recoup 75%. You can use the money you've already paid under the CARES Act that we got from the state. So in essence, we have our match for FEMA. So what we're going to do is then submit what I mentioned, kind of these smaller costs, these supply costs for like gloves and things like that.
You've been muted.
About
to unmute
$10,000,
yourself,
$50,000 through FEMA. And so that's one of our other avenues. And then just in addition, there's some grants out there that are available to health departments. So we're looking at some of those grants that would allow for IT equipment, potentially some build-out grants. And so our office is working with Department of Health to explore those avenues.
Any questions for Lisa as we kind of touched on the financial implications?
Yeah, Lisa, correct me if I'm wrong, the funds that we get from the CARES Act can be put toward the 25% of our obligation for the
Yes,
FEMA?
yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Thank you.
Is there an expiration date on the accessibility of these funds?
It's through the end of the year. It's December 30th is the last date that you can draw.
Can any of these funds be used as for planning purposes for a spend beyond that date?
They haven't issued guidance regarding future preparation. I think there are some that cover, you know, if you're going to be potentially, if there is a vaccination, I think that'll change the ability. These are changing kind of every day, so we'll see what the next round looks like and if they extend, because I think there is a potential that there will be more money available and it will cover kind of a different level of response at that time.
To be honest with you, Kyle, a lot of cities around the state and counties are struggling to identify costs that are actually qualified as reimbursable costs, because most of them, particularly cities, don't have health departments and aren't doing any of these things. So a lot of that money is just sitting there and not being able to be utilized. So if you were to look, probably going forward, we'd be one of the first communities to actually draw upon the resources available to us because we have qualified expenses to do so.
Excellent, thank you.
Lisa, question. The mayor stated that some of those funds, will they be redistributed if they aren't used? Like, will we have
So
a
like,
second
are
bite
you
at the apple?
talking about like the state, the allocations to like the other cities and towns? And so there is some discussion among IFA, which is Indiana Finance Authority. If, you know, for an example, a state or city or a city or township doesn't meet their level of allowable reimbursement, what happens to that money? Is it a potential that if you have more expenses, you could go there? They haven't ruled that out. So I think our hope is that we have some more funds available from IFA to do so.
Thank you.
Any additional questions for Lisa for this update? Appreciate you and your team continuing to track down revenue sources for us. Thanks, Lisa.
Thanks.
At this point, we will turn it over to Monica to
You are no longer muted.
update on the health department. Monica?
I apologize. Dr. Parikh just let me know he doesn't have any audio. He's not able to hear.
Not able to hear. Tracy? Can you double check what might be the problem around the audio?
Okay, I'm back. I hung up and I dialed back in. I'm okay.
All right, very good. Excellent. False alarm. Monica?
Okay, so we thought we would get this meeting started with some general updates. Here's some objectives for what we're going to cover. Most of the agenda items are actually kind of wrapped into this presentation, not just the update. So this is me and Indy giving out masks at the farmer's market. It was so fun. So I first wanted to go over some of the non-COVID services that we've performed so far. Since we have done a lot of talking about COVID, I thought you might be interested to know what else we've been doing. So birth certificates, we've issued quite a lot. This does not include the ones that were initially issued through the State Department of Health, where we were facilitating that. This is since we have been able to print them. So quite a lot of birth certificates, quite a lot of death certificates. The differentiation here is the 37 and 38 starts when the city council passed the fee schedule, which is when we could start billing for the service. So those are the ones that we've actually received compensation for. We've also investigated 30 animal bites, 15 latent TB cases. We have 9 currently on treatment. We have 14 other reportable disease investigations that we've completed. We've issued a whole bunch of food permits and a lot of pool permits as well. You can see the numbers there. We've made 58 inspections, 33 site visits. So that means where we've gone on site, it wasn't a full inspection, but a lot of those were to remind them to switch over their permits or touch base on things. And then 4 full investigations based on valid complaints. We've also investigated 13 other general environmental complaints in addition to a whole lot of executive order violation complaints on masks and general other COVID guidelines. So these are the non-COVID ones. Okay, any questions about any of So this is our dashboard, probably from 2 days ago when I put this together. So a couple of things have changed. The percent positivity right now is at 6.9% on a county level, and the case rate is at a 19.1 currently on from the Fishers data. So you can see that since we have since around July 4th, we've had steadily increasing numbers of cases. We have not had any new deaths in probably more than a month, probably 2 months. So that has not changed. The hospital capacity remains steady. Some of the other indicators that we look at remain good. As you guys know, we had some backlog in our testing process for a little while. That has been resolved. We now are getting our tests back in 24 to 72 hours typically. So definitely under the 4 days since the backlog was resolved. We are doing tracing, contact tracing. We're doing kind of a hybrid model on that, where the individuals who test through our site at our Fishers testing site, which is running about 200 people per day through that site, if they're tested through our site, then we're the first contact to them. If they test positive, we will make that first contact within a day. Typically, the morning we receive the report, and then we will solicit their contacts from them and notify those contacts. We then let the state take over the ongoing monitoring that happens. They usually have some automated text message reminders to judge symptoms and that kind of stuff. So we're relying on them to do that ongoing follow-up, because we feel like what we can most contribute to is that early notification in order to get ahead of this disease. Let's see. We can only do that, though, for the folks that are tested through our site, because once they go through the state system, that's the other way we get reports on these, and that's where this data comes from, is through the state system. There's a several-day delay process on that, but once they hit the state system, then they automatically start getting phone calls from the state. We do follow up on ones that don't seem to be getting those phone calls. There's some lost to follow-ups, but by and large, the most impact we can make is on the ones that are tested at our site. Sorry about that. Is it in my computer? Oh, sorry. And as far as, let's see, compliance, we have pretty good compliance with contact tracing, and it's not perfect. There are certainly people out there that will not help because they don't, for privacy reasons, or for whatever reason. But we have pretty good compliance. We do run into occasional situations where people do not want to quarantine or isolate as we are recommending, and we're going to talk to you about that here in a minute. You can see this is a picture of the dashboard. So, you guys are aware we have these dashboards that are updated daily. We have this one, and then we have our local Fishers testing site dashboard available. We are producing daily videos with myself or Dr. Lane or guest speakers to update our community on the situation. We're going through a revamp of our website to make that a little bit more clear as well. And then we produce a community metrics that I know that most of you guys are familiar with, but we'll go through those, the basics of those here in a minute, as well as a next discussion topic. We've been working very closely with the schools. I think I'm probably communicating with somebody from the school system every day, whether it be following up on an athletic investigation or attending board meetings, where both Dr. Lane and I were at this morning for 3 hours. We also have been working with businesses. We had a Zoom call with the local daycare administrators yesterday. We've been on the business calls with a bunch of businesses, as well as we've had one call so far with local healthcare providers to try to kind of make sure that we're doing outreach with them as well. And then plans for the future. We're looking to hire a few people. We are looking to, I don't know if this is on the next, maybe I need to, let me see where this goes. Yeah, okay. So I do want to talk about the plans for the future. We have submitted for state funding and support to expand our testing capability. So they are offering to any local health department basically a full package that includes all of the equipment and lab testing and all of those fees, in addition to money to help support providing extra testing. So even though we're already doing testing for about 200 people a day, they're offering this as an additional option for local health departments. So we have submitted for that, and we've already received a big shipment of supplies related to that. So we are planning to increase our testing capabilities and increase the capacity so that we can do the appropriate amount of testing. Not every county in the state has taken advantage of this. Some of our surrounding counties are not taking advantage of it. Hamilton County Health Department is taking advantage of it, and we'll be having 3 sites as well. So Hamilton County and Fishers should be very well covered with testing. We expect that will start around the beginning of September. And we'll be bringing on some additional people to help with that testing. So we do have that position posted right now as a contract position. We are also bringing on some contracted positions to assist with contact tracing in support of the eventuality for schools going back. So we know that this will produce a serious strain on the contact investigations, both from the school end and from our end. So we are in the process of contracting with individuals. We have that position posted as well in order to support the schools in those efforts. I would expect that that the time for those positions would be fully reimbursable as well under some of these funds.
Monica, can you go back,
Yep.
just frame this?
Mm-hmm.
If we go way back to the kind of like the point of testing and tracing,
Mm-hmm.
in one of your presentations, I believe it was before the city council and school board, you and Dr. Lane talked about the Harvard's recommendation on the percentage or the number of tests that need to be done in a population in order to both reach kind of awareness, but then suppression,
Yep.
or however your medical terms are. Can you talk about where we are today, and then, with this additional, where do we need to get to
Yep.
have a reasonable chance at actual mitigation of the virus outside of just the natural course it's going to take?
Sure. So there are suppression goals and there's mitigation goals. So mitigation is the baseline for what you need to do in order to survive through the virus. Suppression is where you need to be in order to get ahead, right? So we have those targets both from a community, kind of similar to our community risk rating scale, as far as what's the percent positivity, where do we need to be at in order to shut things down versus open things up, right? So the mitigation, from a percent positivity rating would be 10%, you got to shut it down. That's just mitigating. That's what we did back in April or March. The suppression is when you've got it down to a manageable level and you just can live with it fairly comfortably. So they also have those goalposts for testing capability. And for a population of our size, what we would need to be doing would be around, in order to meet the mitigation target, we need to do about, I think 100, something like 100 per day. I don't have the figures with me right now, but they do it per population based. We would need to do about 100 tests per day. So we have exceeded the mitigation target on that because we're testing just at our testing site alone 200 per day. But in order to meet that suppression goal, that higher level goal to really get ahead of things, we would need to test about 400 people per day. So with doubling the capacity of our testing with this state funding that's coming in, it should really position us very well to be able to meet, at least have the capacity to meet those testing targets for suppression, not just mitigation.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. So that's what we're looking to do for COVID.
Any questions on COVID before she moves for staffing conversation?
So I just wanted to pull up kind of maybe the latest organizational structure. And myself and then Dr. Lane alongside me as a health officer, we're hiring currently for an epidemiologist and a health educator. And, we're hoping that they can really cross all programs and support all programs that are under the health department. And then the two separate arms of the health department, at least for right now, I'm calling them environmental health and population health. So population health is what holds like vital records, communicable diseases, COVID, chronic disease, mental health, any of those kinds of things. Whereas environmental health is where your food permitting, your pools, your open water testing, which we are doing too. I didn't even include that in the numbers. Sorry about that. Septics, wells, possibly housing, vector control. So there's a lot of different things under environmental health services. So right now we have one person identified doing vital records, and then we have a full-time public health nurse as well as a part-time public health nurse, in addition to the contracted contact tracers. And then in our environmental health division, we have Todd Succi, who's also the building commissioner, is taking on the environmental health services coordinator role, and as an expert in inspections, he's really done a great job to organize this. And we've got 3.5 food inspectors that are out doing the inspections of the restaurants and the food trucks and farmers markets. We've also got, are gaining some knowledge with the septics and wells, and are working on a vector control plan, which would be pests, right? And let's see, we're doing open water testing as well, and I think working on a simpler way to publish those on our website so people can see the health of the waterways a little bit more clearly. And we just hired an inspector for the pools as well. So that's what we're looking at. Any questions about that? Nope. Okay. So hopefully you guys have all had a chance to see our community risk rating scale. The only thing I put up here was just the metrics. Just to kind of explain what we were looking at and how we developed these, because I know that we didn't have a good chance to present these to the board beforehand. We were looking at a simple way to communicate to the community where we were at with COVID, and what kind of activity recommendations that we would have depending on a set of metrics and what the risk level might be for a person, whether they had like high risk factors, like they're over 65 and they have heart disease and diabetes, versus for the average person that has less risk, what kind of activity recommendations we would have for them. We correlated these with some school-based recommendations as well. So the HSE schools have looked to that in part to develop their reentry plan. The way that we chose these metrics was by looking at a variety of sources, including the WHO, the CDC, the Harvard Global Health Institute, and then some other communities that have developed similar metrics. We then, they didn't all match. The White House Task Force was another one. They didn't all match, so we kind of had to figure out where on the scale we needed to be. And in order to figure that out, we looked at some of our community demographics, such as the fact that we have a very, very healthy population. We're the healthiest county in the state, and our health measures as a city are better even than the county. So that informed some of this, as well as the fact that one of the measures that we aren't number one in is mental health. So we wanted to give some allowance for the needs of mental health factoring into some of these metrics. That said, these metrics are still very consistent and fairly conservative when it comes to pandemic response. So they definitely match up with what we've seen in other communities by and large. We also have, so what you see is our primary metrics that we're focusing on, which is our percent positivity and our case rate. We didn't want to pick one metric because they can be influenced by so many other things. For example, our percent positivity rate, if we focused only on that and we knew we had a big testing delay with our labs, our percent positivity rate would be less meaningful, because if people can't get testing, if only the sickest people get testing because only sick people are allowed to get tested like we saw in the beginning, then the percent positivity rate will go way up because those are the only people getting tested. So it has to be informed by a variety of factors and contextual factors, which is why we have these secondary and tertiary metrics. So just so you know kind of how we came to that decision. Do you guys have any questions about that? Nope. So the rest of this is the only slide left, is just we wanted to discuss a couple of things as it related to a couple of different areas. So one of them is the risk rating. So what we've put on our website is this bar. This is front and center on our website, on the Fishers Health Department website, that we have this bar and then we have this arrow kind of pointing in the direction we're headed. So we wanted you guys to give the opportunity to give any input on what you're thinking, or what your thought process is on what should lead to us changing levels and switching direction on these metrics. So I would open that up for feedback.
So I think maybe point of discussion, maybe to draw out some policy discussion here. One question that looms in my mind is how frequently these colors are going to change, because they have fairly significant implications to a resident or a parent if their kid's going to school. So, you know, as you and Indy kind of contemplate, are we in yellow, are we in orange, are we in green, are we in red? I mean, how often should residents anticipate a review of that, and when it's going to change, so that you're not, Tuesday I wake up and my kids can go to school this way, Wednesday I wake up and then go this way, and Thursday they're back to that. Like, how is that going to work, or how do you see that working?
Exactly, and that's kind of why we wanted to open it up for feedback from the board, was because I don't anticipate that it should or would be kind of a rapid thing, but should we be having a number of days of consideration when all the metrics are in one direction before we move it, or should we be, you know, I did move it into orange the other day because every metric was solidly in orange, and it had been that way for several days, and you know, so in good conscience, I can't say it, okay, we're just happily in
So I don't
yellow
know,
forever
Kyle,
without
in your
some
work
thought.
in research and different things, I mean, if there's if there's sound procedures for like a 5-day look back, a 10-day, some sort of consistency. I mean, I know everybody's going to want the minute good news to happen, they want it to lighten up and be a different color. But at the same time, this up and down can cause a lot of turmoil. So I don't know if you have any thoughts on if you've seen some sort of procedure or policy around data in that regard.
Not specifically to procedures or policies, but something certainly very common, and both of our professionals can speak to this as well, is operating within this confidence interval. The idea is that here's where we're at. So if it's going to be, especially when you're at that 7%, so if you're at 6.9, the next day at 7.1, then 6.9, and you're yo-yoing right around that mark, then it comes to you of finding out, okay, so if we're going to yo-yo around here, does the average, are we comfortable saying, all right, if it's going to bounce back and forth, is that a confidence? Are we fairly confident that this is exhibits more traits of staying in yellow, or is it more traits of staying in orange? And so you can have that, and objectively, I agree. I think that if all the facts say you're in orange, then it would be fairly irresponsible to say, well, no, we're fine in the yellow, because, you know, that's how you move to red. Things will continue to get worse. Right. And so when you got these confidence intervals, right, there's a certain percentage or margin within which, as long as you see that noise, if you can control for that, if the noise is inside of those two bars, then you can safely say, we feel we can stay on this side of that. So, and again, that would be to the health department.
How does that work, though, when you're not just looking at one variable, one numerical variable, but you're looking at this comprehensive view of things? So, you know, it's one thing for us all to go online and look at infection rates and say, well, it went from 6.9 to 7.3%, therefore now we're in orange. But to Monica and Indy's point, and I support and agree with, there's a holistic view of this. I guess the question I would pose back to you and Dr. Lane is it an everyday, yes, we look at those numerical values, but we're also looking at the totality? Or is that every Friday, you know, we're looking at that number, plus we're doing a review of all these other metrics? I guess that's the question I have.
And that's a great question. So since we've started this, I've done like a daily review on the videos and things like that, and given all of those figures, and we hope to keep our website updated daily. And I guess the key metrics that we're using, that percent positive, so the idea was we use these two key metrics, our case incidence rate and our percent positivity rate. And we look at where those are at. And then the other metrics kind of inform the context of can we still respond, so so it makes it a little bit trickier because we're weighting them differently, and there's no, it's trickier. For example, right now, we've got the one metric on the border, we've got the other one very solidly in orange, and then our supporting metrics are all in green or yellow. So I don't want to be changing stuff willy-nilly. I think there should be a process. To be frank with you, I don't know what that process ought to be. I don't think it should be every day. I think, every week would be more reasonable. Those numbers do fluctuate, so I don't know if we take an average of averages from a week. That just seems crazy because they're already averages. Like the percent positivity is already a 7-day rolling average, and the case rate is already a 14-day rolling average, so they're already averaged. Yeah. Go ahead.
I have a question in terms of, does it make sense to look at a 14 or 21-day window? And that may not certainly be popular, but if we're just looking at a quarantine of 14 days of so many people. Sorry. The question is, does it make sense to look at a 14 to 21-day window because of the quarantine being 14 days? If you have a number, if we're in level 3 now, and you have a certain percentage of people that are positive and should be quarantined over that 14-day period, then does it at all make sense to look at every 2 weeks to think about changing the level?
I think I see where you're going with that. I can't say there's any
There's no correlation with the numbers?
official recommendation from any agency that I'm aware of that correlates that together as a process step. But I see how that might make some sense.
It seems as though, as uncomfortable as it may be for people, is that this is something as dynamic and complex as this requires a degree of empowerment to our medical director and to our health director to maybe come up with a consistent time frame of when you're releasing your, if it's every 2 weeks or whatever. But then also we all recognize the fact that there may come a point in time that something happens with the data and the context where you go, where you're like, look, things either got they got a lot better very quickly, or they got a lot worse very quickly, and we have to take quicker action. I mean, that's just, I think that's the nature of the environment that we're living in at this point. The only thing that I would hope, and I don't know whether we can do this, is to give a parent or a person in Fishers some sort of predictability to when they could see, hey, every Friday, we're gonna know whether that color's gonna change or not. So they're not saying, well, I gotta tune in every single day to find out whether Monica's changing it from red to orange or what have you. I just don't know whether we can provide that to them or not.
I mean, I think we definitely can, and I think that's honestly a great idea. So I would accept anyone's feedback on how often that would happen. I'm fine with every week.
Yeah. Monica, I think because we're reaching the mitigation goal for our population, that the metrics that you're using, it's reasonable that on a weekly basis, as you and Dr. Lane interpret it, there's an amount of trust that we give to you to make those calls. If we weren't reaching our mitigation goal and the data and the analytics were not enough, maybe we'd need to take a different direction. But I think that trust should lay in your hands because we are reaching our mitigation goal, and no one else that I know of is at that mitigation goal of 200 residents a day, 100 residents per day for testing.
In terms of, so I like the idea of not just location, but directionality. I think that is nice, let people know what's going on. I think in addition to maybe the letting people know, because again, when it comes to policy, we're not robots, right? We have to worry about our families, not even just children, but senior care, loved ones. We've got a lot of things going on, and if the policies change every day, then it's hard to adapt. But I think that with the schedule, you can also have not just direction, but magnitude. And so the idea is that if at any point the direction is heading up and it's trending 7.1, 7.2, and you know that by the end of the week will be in orange, so be it, make the call. But if it goes 7.2, 8.1, 9.3, make that call today. And so the idea is that there can be just more than directionality, there can be magnitude. And then amongst yourselves, determine that if there is a certain threshold whereby the magnitude is so profound, and again, warranted by evidence that this is not just a blip or the idea of we're just testing only the sick people getting in, if that truly is something that the magnitude and direction line up with all the other indicators, then I think that would be warranted to make a call outside of that, whatever set interval that would be.
And I think the other thing important to note here, and Chris, you can chime in, all of this that we have up there today are recommendations and guidelines. So this is,
They're not orders.
take these, this isn't a public health order. Now, any one of these could become a public health order if it was necessitated, but right now, none of these are legally binding recommendations.
That's correct. All we have right now from our own health department perspective is the public health order that we issued, which is the general mask mandate that we have.
So I guess by the same token, I appreciate your input, thank you guys. By the same token, on the changing direction, that I think takes a little more time and consideration to figure out if we're going up or down. I don't know what you guys think, but I don't know if there's any kind of process that you have been thinking of that we should be thinking of when we're looking at changing direction.
This is specific to the arrow.
Specific to the arrow, yeah. I mean, we've been seeing the case rates climb. The percent positivity has been bouncing around a lot more, but the case rates have been steadily climbing.
My 2 cents on this, and I'd be interested to hear the board's thoughts. I feel like the color is about the data plus the context for which we live in, and it takes more of your guys' professional expertise to decide that. I feel like the arrow is more data-driven, where it's a trajectory of the current trends of whatever key metrics numerically are out there. That's just how I gauge it, but I'd be interested to hear the board or your perspective on that.
I agree. I guess the question is, there's still a lot of bouncing around. We're a fairly small data set, and so there's still some variability, which is why we do the 14-day rolling average and the 7-day rolling averages. Would we want to see that 14-day or 7-day rolling average decreasing for a solid week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks before we make that call to allow for that bouncing around period? So that's, I guess, my question on whether you guys have any input on that.
Monica, hey, this is Dr. Parikh. Sorry to interrupt, but I see that this is one of the discussion points, one of the bullet points that you have there. What have we looked into, or have we looked into the point of care testing that may help drive some of these, these parameters?
We have started that, and we're going to talk about that here in a minute. So
okay.
It's challenging because when you show the graph on our dashboard, it seems very simple to say, well, I can tell you right now which direction we're headed currently. I mean, it seems very logical when I look at it today, but that's looking at over the entire course of our testing.
Yeah, look at it went way up and then it dipped and then it went even further up.
Yeah.
So anyway, I mean, I can just keep doing it every week. I just wanted you guys to have the opportunity to kind of think about it and give input or feedback if you had any.
Do you have a recommendation? I mean, what are your thoughts?
My thoughts are that probably like a 2-week period at least to see a solid trend before we change direction.
I certainly feel better now that testing has caught up. I think we were flying blind there for a few weeks as we were trying to get tested. If your tests are 14 days behind, you have a very difficult time knowing what's going on in your population base. But
absolutely.
Now that they're caught up, and I think you could implement that 14-day period now, and then if you find out that it really is lagging too far behind what you're seeing in the data coming in, then we make adjustments. You got to start somewhere, and we can always scale that back or forward.
Okay. thank you for your feedback. I think, Indy, are you going to talk about the rest of this?
You can sit here if you want.
Huh?
Do you want me to come up there? You can sit.
I don't know. Yeah, I want you to come up.
Despite COVID. So just want to continue the conversation. As Monica mentioned, with the help from the state, we're going to have an additional lane starting in September where we can do testing, not just for Fishers residents, but for any resident of Indiana, which I think is fantastic. So in an effort to support the schools, we wanted to get your feedback in terms of lowering the age limit. So as a reminder, we test 12 and up. The state is doing 2 and up. And so the state's doing 2 and up. And we wanted to get your feedback in terms of, do you support lowering the age limit? I think that if we go 5 and up, we can capture those kids that will be in school and can help with, contact tracing and getting an idea of what's going on in our schools. But again, we wanted to open that up for discussion from all of you.
Dr. Lane, question. So when we open the parallel testing, the state lane will have to do 2-year-olds, correct? Oh,
No,
we
we
don't?
can
It's
set-
not an option? Okay.
It's our discretion.
Here, yeah.
Okay, understood.
Kyle?
At one of our, I believe, one of our earlier meetings, we actually had this, I believe Dr. Parikh and Dr. Sal were discussing about the practicality of age. I don't know if Dr. Parikh would like to weigh in. I know that there was a discussion on this a couple of months ago when we lowered it to 12. Were there any concerns that you would have?
I also heard this morning that after Labor Day, that K through 4, I believe, are starting school live, with 5 through 12 being delayed and all virtual. So I think we're going to have to lower the age limit to account for those kids that are going back to school, the younger kids.
And it would still be a nasal swab, so it would not have to be a nasopharyngeal swab, which I think makes a big difference when you talk about kids. Monica and I have looked at there's a really neat video that, we could post and parents could show to their kids about what's going to happen when they have their testing done. So I think that that's helpful as well.
Well, that's why I was wondering about the saliva, the point of care test, which may be a little more feasible for younger children.
Right. And so we can discuss that as well. We've been looking at the opportunity to obtain point of care test and see if you all, again, get some feedback to see if you think that would be helpful in supporting the schools with, there are a variety of tests or saliva. There's still nasal swab ones that are both antigen and PCR type tests as well. So wanted to see what your thoughts were about incorporating that into our, continuing the drive-through, but also having a point of care option.
What has the feedback been on the reliability of those tests? Early on it was, Abbott came out with the 15-minute test that was supposed to be the end-all be-all, and that turned out to be somewhat discredited in terms of its reliability. So how confident do you guys feel that there's products in the market that would provide the level of reliability that you'd want to do this?
Right, so there are 3 tests that they are currently using at community, and I can speak about for community in the med checks. Unfortunately, you have to be called in by a provider to get that test, but it seems to be performing well. They're also using a saliva test, which is not point of care. It gets sent in for their preoperative patients. That seems to be performing well as, in addition. So I think that they've gotten better. They measure those tests by copies per cc in terms of so the number of copies that it picks up per cc determines how sensitive the test is. And so interestingly enough, the Abbott one, when you look at, there's a website that talks about the copies per cc. The Abbott one is supposed to perform actually very well. Community is not using that one. They're using a couple of other different ones. They looked at the Abbott one, and because of the concerns early on, they are not using it.
So would your thought be that somehow the health department would provide these to the schools or
make it part of the drive-through,
Interesting.
lane, again, it would be something that we would have a location where people could come and do the point of care testing based on,
Some
whatever
criteria.
criteria we come up with.
What do you guys have any idea costs associated with point of care?
So Monica got some information about the Abbott tests?
Yeah, I'm not 100% sure about what the costs are. You have the option of either buying the equipment outright or renting the equipment. At no fee, you pay for the test kits themselves. So what they've told us is that we meet the quantity that would be required for them to provide the equipment to us. We would not have to buy it, but I don't remember the cost per test. Do you recall? I don't know if that was in the brochure that we received so far. The equipment itself is like $4,000, I think, for the machine. Right? Remember that?
Well, so maybe we bifurcate these. So on the age limit, the one thought I had about going down to 5 is that if we get into these school situations, there's a good chance, and I'll just speak personally. I mean, I have a 6-year-old, a 2-year-old, and a newborn, and I just wonder, is 5 low enough for, does 2 make more sense? Because when that family finds out that they had an exposure in the elementary school, they're going to want to get their other kids tested as well. So does it make more sense to provide that at an even lower age level? And what are the issues that come with that?
Just to jump in on that, we cannot do it for 2 and up from the state funds. So just FYI. Or we can't do it for below 2.
Yeah,
we can
okay.
only do it for 2 and up.
But but is there a reason you guys stopped at 5 and then go down to 2?
Just trying to support the schools and the school age kids. So logistically, obviously, the younger the kids are, the more complicated it gets to hold them down and stick a swab in their nose.
Keep them in the car seat.
Especially, keep them in the car seat, but especially like if you're having to reach over, if there's kids in the middle, which a lot of people put their smallest kids in the middle car seat, you're basically climbing into their car in order to make that happen. So just logistically, it becomes a lot more complicated the younger the kids get to ensure safety. It's just in their nasal cavity, so it's not going all the way back. But it's still, with wiggling and things, normally in an office setting, you would have the parent holding that kid securely. So it's a little bit different than when you're in a car than it is when you're in an office setting.
For the point of care devices, are these like Clio Wave type desktop devices, or what's the education requirements required to operate this particular test?
They are CLIA waived.
Okay.
And some of them look like pregnancy tests.
Yeah, yeah.
So, some of them are just little cassettes. Others are, you put a cassette in an analyzer. So it just depends on which test you choose.
Got it.
So is there a consensus on age from the board or direction?
We can always lower it too. So if we start at 5 and we realize that there's a demand for a lower age, then we can come back, we can make an adjustment. So, or we could start at 2. Again, this is open for discussion.
I'd take any recommendation from the board.
I also worry about those preschoolers.
I would do. I don't know, and I guess I'd defer to Monica and the chief, I guess, from a personnel perspective. If our families and residents need these tests, whether they're, I can understand below 2, that brings in a whole nother level of complexity. But if a 4-year-old needs one, why, and we have the capability and the capacity, why wouldn't we do it? If we think we can do it safely. I understood there. And I guess that would be the only restraint, right? At this point, or constraint would be, we don't believe that we can do it safely.
Correct.
Because we have capacity.
Correct.
We have the capability.
Correct.
So I guess I would defer to you. If we can't do it safely, then we shouldn't do it, obviously. But if we can, then why wouldn't we?
I agree. It is hard to get tests for kids that young. I think, I guess generally, when we roll stuff out, it's a little bit easier to lower it incrementally. And then if it goes well, if you're not having any problems, you say, okay, we did pretty well with the 5-year-olds. It wasn't as bad as we thought. Let's move it down now.
I think some of it just comes down to once you get to preschool and the kindergarten, it's when the positive test, what that actually means in terms of by the time you're in school, it's the first time you become a spread vector. When you're 2, your parents need to drive you somewhere. If you have a positive test and you're 2, you're not going to grab the car keys and drive out and go somewhere. your parents have to transport you somewhere. And so I think the peace of mind is my child sick? And that's certainly terrifying enough. I would absolutely want to test to know if my 2-year-old was sick. I don't have a 2-year-old, but I think it's more about in terms of the idea of mitigation suppression, trying to find out who has it and is positive. 2 and 3-year-olds are exclusively going to need to be transported somewhere, and they're going to be close to the parents. So it's by the time you get to kindergarten, now you hop on a bus, you ride to school, you touch things, you're with your friends, you become an independent spreader of this as opposed to dependent upon your parents. Again, that's just more of an outlay. That's neither here nor there. That's not trying to over or undervalue the importance of knowing.
Certainly, yeah, that's an interesting insight. I mean, to your point, if the ultimate goal here is to suppress the pandemic, they're the least value to identify. Is that fair, to Kyle's point?
I don't know.
I mean, daycare.
Daycare.
How school's opening and us lowering the age is going to impact the volumes that we're seeing once there are concerns about exposures. So that's another reason why, if I have a vote, I would suggest starting
Absolutely.
at 5 and then maybe considering going down once we have both lanes going, we have a better understanding. Maybe we have a point of care test and we have a better idea of our volumes.
Yeah, I agree with Dr. Lane. I think that we should offer it to 2 years old, but I think we do it incrementally. We'll learn a lot, just the mechanics of administering the test and the partnership with the parents with 5-year-olds that will help us test 2-year-olds instead of just flipping the switch at one time. So I agree.
Yeah, I was going to suggest the same, just that if you guys are all okay with us administering the test to 2 and up, like we can start with 5 and then, shift without, needing your input after that.
Sounds good.
Yeah, I think that's the general direction, so.
And then if we can find tests, point of care tests that are reasonable, they have good, in terms of the sensitivity information that we will have, it is limited since these are new tests. Are you all in favor of us looking at some options and offering that as well?
Definitely. I think it's a good
Yeah.
option. With the CLIA wave devices, I think it's a good option because now you've got the portability, you've got, in terms of staffing demands, you open this up to a much wider group when you've got these CLIA devices.
And there are very few places that you can go to get a point of care test. I think, once again, we will be trendsetters if we can offer a point of care test to people that don't feel as though they need to go to a med check or to a hospital.
Absolutely.
Okay, moving on.
Okay, next item is we have our mask mandate, which will expire on September 4th. Prior to that, the governor's mask mandate will expire on August 26th. There's some differences with our mask mandate. We have a mask requirement for children that are ages 2 and up, I believe, 5 and up, I'm sorry. And the state's mandate is 8 and up. So my question for you guys is that, are you all comfortable if we decide to renew? We'll see what the governor says. But if his age remains 8 and up, are you all comfortable with our mask mandate, which starts at 5 and up, and staying with that?
Yes.
Yes.
Legal question here, Chris.
Yes.
Do we need to take an official action to extend, or because if it expires the 4th and we don't have another board meeting, then, so today, besides general direction from this board, do we need to take any official action?
No, I think we can all give general recommendations and guidance to Dr. Lane to be able to issue a subsequent order to extend it. I think the nuance would be if the governor comes out with something next week that's unexpected that we need to react to, then,
Okay.
We can react to that in the best way possible. But I think if this board provides general guidance to Dr. Lane on what that extension could look like, then I think she'll have all the authority she needs to take that extension.
And so I'm clear.
Because right now, our public health order, right, is just a mask mandate for anybody 5 and up. And then it has general recommendations for children who are in daycare settings who are younger than 5. And then there's various exceptions to that. So presumably, the governor is going to either extend or not extend his mandate, and then he's going to modify or leave it the same. And so the modifications are what we're probably going to have to react to most outside of just the general extension of the public health order.
And so I'm clear from a legal perspective, Dr. Lane has the authority to not only continue the mask mandate, but also if she decided to scale that back based on whatever factors, both of those authorities reside in her authority.
That's correct.
The board can provide direction or guidance or what have you.
That's correct. And I mean, I think I would always appreciate the board's support of that policy decision.
In case she just gets, power hungry and, goes crazy.
We don't.
I
want
will,
her going
I
rogue
definitely
on
won't
us.
do that. We want as many people on the ship. No, I'm
Yeah,
teasing.
so now that we understand kind of the framework, I think I saw heads nodding here that you guys would encourage staying at the five-year-old age.
And even the governor's order strongly recommends masks between the ages of 2 and 7. They just didn't go so far as to lower it.
I do believe that your guys' directive helped provide the school some guidance and support in making those masks mandatory into the schools, where otherwise I think it would have been a difficult conversation. So I think that's been good leadership on that front. Okay.
Okay. Last thing is that, as Monica mentioned, there are lots of complaints that get phoned in about businesses where they are not ensuring that the customers or the staff are wearing masks. And Monica will have a conversation with the owners or the of the businesses to discuss. We primarily want to provide education, and we still get calls that the business is not complying with the mask mandate. And so what we wanted to discuss today was, how should we go about handling these businesses? Monica and I had discussions about phone call, then maybe a site visit to say, hey, let us help you, assist you in helping people adhere to the mask mandate, and then providing maybe a health directive to say, as a result of our phone calls, our education over the phone, our site visit, you have not complied and you must be closed for X amount of days. So we want to get some feedback in terms of how that order should go. We also discussed, should it be, we talk to you over the phone, we send you a letter to say, hey, if we continue to get complaints, we will have a site visit, provide you with some education, and then you run the risk of being closed. So just wanted to get some feedback in terms of your thoughts on how that should go.
Maybe Monica or Chris, you could elaborate on what our ordinances explicitly say in terms of, in most of our ordinance violations in the city, there's a fairly prescriptive kind of progression to discipline or compliance. Like, hey, you're going to get a letter that tells you you're out of compliance. After so many days, if you're not in compliance, you're going to get a fine. After so many days of that, you're going to get an additional fine. Do we have prescriptive elements like that within the code for the health department?
We do, and I'll pull those out specifically so I can reference those to the board after the meeting, but typically we have a process in place in which we're notifying people, depending on what chapter or what violation it is. I mean, retail food establishments look a little different than pool, look a little different than, communicable disease. But generally, there's a notice of a violation, an opportunity to rectify that violation, and then moving forward to a penal fine if those recommendations aren't followed.
So this specific to I assume we're talking mainly about a face mask directive.
Well, actually, we have the two versions on there, the individuals versus businesses. So this is something that's really commonly done for individuals who violate public health, who violate public health recommendations when it comes to communicable disease.
Yeah.
It's something I'm very familiar with in the world of tuberculosis. And so it's not typically spelled out in the code exactly what the order is, but it's more of a commonly understood process. So for individuals, it's a little more clear, and that would be, you tell the person the recommendations as orders, and this would apply more to isolation and quarantine, right, in the realm of COVID. If they are willfully not compliant and they're saying, forget you, I don't believe this is even a real thing, I'm going to work, then you may take the next step of doing a health directive and maybe a couple more, and then the eventuality, if they become really non-compliant, would be a court order. Now, in something like tuberculosis, that lasts 9 months, so you have a lot of time of trying to get that on board. In COVID, it's only a 10-day period of time, so we don't anticipate doing any court orders, but rather using that kind of health directive model, both on a individual basis should we need it, which definitely has precedent, but we're just not really sure where to go with the businesses. I'm not sure what precedent there is for that, and it's not prescribed in the communicable disease code.
I'd be interested to hear the board's perspective on the part that I have a difficult time with on the business side is I understand holding them accountable for their employees wearing masks and adhering to whatever policies and procedures that are out there. But if I'm Target and all my employees are wearing masks, I put signs up that says everyone should wear a mask, and then somebody goes in there and they see 3 people that weren't wearing masks, are we saying that we're going to hold the business accountable for the individual who decided not to wear the mask? That's the part that I have a hard time getting on board with, because now we're putting them in our job.
Right, so that's why we want to establish kind of a clear set of what would be the steps that we would go through. So we have, for example, a couple of businesses that we've received repeated complaints on. We've had repeated phone calls with them. We've had site visits. We've offered partnerships to say, hey, like maybe we can help you with, suggesting extra placement of posters or hand sanitizer or X's on things to make it a little bit more obvious that they're following this. Definite people employed that the vast majority are not wearing masks and that kind of thing. So at what stage do we take it to some other level, I guess is the question, or do we just not try to enforce anything?
And you guys jump in here, but for me, if it's regarding their employees' behavior or the way that they're conducting business, that's in violation of either the state or our local health department, then I think there should be a clear progression of, you've been made aware, you have a certain amount of time to rectify whatever that issue is. If we come back and you're still not doing it, then there should be some sort of consequences, because that's consistent with every single other business regulation or zoning regulation that we deal with. We have a very predictable path forward. Where I would be uncomfortable is if we were trying to hold them accountable for enforcement of a local ordinance around face masks to a customer, let's say, because I don't know how they have the legal authority to do that. I think we're putting a lot on them to do that. I mean, I think we should say you have to put signs up, you have to do all these things, but having that person confront the individual and try to get compliance.
And we're not suggesting that.
Yeah.
So I think if we're very clear in this, a health directive that we might need to draft, it would be all of those things, like put X number of signs up, put hand sanitizer stations, X out, whatever.
In this example, it doesn't sound like there's being any effort. There's no effort being made to improve.
I see.
And so that's what's frustrating. You're getting the same phone calls. Monica's having the same discussion, and nothing is changing. And I think that some sort of notification that there is a process will probably be all that most individuals or businesses need.
So, Chris, from a legal perspective, if they're violating a public health directive, is there something in our law today that allows for penalties? If it's just generally, I'm violating a directive from our medical director of our health department.
Yeah, so I mean, you kind of have a bleeding into the general communicable disease chapter that Monica's probably familiar with, because in our public health order, we didn't specifically state, and for good reason, that, not doing X is a dollar amount fine. But in the communicable disease statute, you do have the authority to start doing some enforcement actions. And I'm not as familiar with the directives, but we'll certainly work with Monica on getting there so that we can ramp up that typical process of notification, compliance, and instituting an enforcement action.
What are any thoughts from the board on this?
The one exception too, and I'm sure we're all aware of, like restaurants and retail, or restaurants in particular, that's under the governor's executive order currently right now. So a violation of that is subject to a Class B misdemeanor under the governor's executive order. So it's just important to keep in mind that there's things that the governor has called out that will have a higher level of scrutiny than will our public health order going forward.
So is the request by the leadership of the health department to really develop a, because unlike the individual, where you go get a public health order and they tell them by court, you have to go stay at home or whatever. In this particular case, is it more likely that a fine would be like there'd be some financial penalty? Because I guess, Chris, I'm just thinking, we have the ability to levy a penalty, a fine, under other scenarios. What I don't know here is whether the public health department under state statute has the ability to put a fee or fine structure in place prior to a court-ordered public health.
Absent a local ordinance is something I'm gonna have to look into more, because typically you have a fee schedule that you write it against, and
Right.
we don't have that right now currently. We just have all the powers that are given to us under the public health laws, which are typically notice and enforcement action. So any kind of penal fine that would be taken, I think we'd have to additionally address with a ordinance.
That's put into some, I want to say Marion County's communicable disease ordinance has it in there. Ours does not have that fine in our communicable disease ordinance, so there isn't any fine in our current structure that we could exact without some voting on behalf of
It would seem the logical
council.
route, because to go to the court for some sort of, I mean, you could have the health department close them down. You could go to the courts for some sort of injunctive relief of some sort, or you could come up with some sort of fee and fine structure that allows for a progression.
Well, that's
to those
right,
other
because
things.
most of our fee schedules too, there is a progressive discipline to it. So there's a first-time offense, a second-time offense, a third-time offense, and usually any subsequent offense is at that high-level amount. So that does make a great deal of sense, and I'm happy to draft something in conjunction with that.
Does that make sense, or with the outcomes that you two were looking for, or is that different than what you were searching for here today?
It makes sense. We were actually looking for something a little bit lighter, just because in most cases, in my experience, at least from the individual ones that I've served, the directive itself is enough of a gravity that you
Sure.
lend to it that prompts action in probably 20 times out of 21.
Yeah, I think on the individual one, I'm in agreement with you. I think on the business one, if we're going out to a business multiple times and having to try to get compliance, and the best we can do is, no, we really mean it this time.
Yep.
I mean, that's not, we're not gonna get any,
Yeah,
That's
the
where you're gonna get
perception.
the action if you.
yeah, exactly, you gotta start.
Charge them.
Yeah, you gotta charge them.
But I also, I think I want to clarify too, what's the order? Phone calls, site visit, letter, phone calls, communication, opportunities for improvement, then a directive that says this is what will happen if you don't comply. So, we wanted some feedback in terms of that. I think sometimes if the letter comes last, my concern is that they didn't feel like they had an opportunity
Sure.
to take it seriously and make some changes.
Yeah, I think all of us would want voluntary compliance first, right? And give them the opportunity to rectify the situation, because they may just not know. But once it's clear and we can demonstrate, and this always helps too from a legal perspective down the road, if we can demonstrate that we've given them ample information and acknowledgement of the violation, and they still didn't do anything, then I think, it positions us well to deal with it in other ways. So I do think one thing that I would just request is that whatever process you come up with, it's as clear as day and as transparent to anyone that sees it, that this is how this works. So that they know, okay, I got this letter, what could happen next if I don't do it? Well, here's what happens next. And I think as long as we have that, I'm supportive.
Is
And
this-
that it just be consistent with other things we're doing, so it doesn't seem like we're hitting
Exactly.
attacking with a sledgehammer.
And I'm kind of wondering, is this something that would be best like amended to the ordinance that we have in the
It would
communicable
be,
disease
because
ordinance?
I think what I would envision is we'd come up with the entire process from the notice to the letter to the fine all the way, and just walk through step by step what it would look like. So we will develop that fee schedule, but we'll also develop those softer touches that you were hitting on today with the directives and the letters to
Yeah,
those
this
businesses.
is not as boring as it might sound. It's not that different than like a high grass and weeds ordinance.
That's
where
right.
you say, you
You
get
notice
notified
those.
your grass is out of compliance, you have so many days to fix it. If you don't, this happens. And you're given you're given notice and then you have a certain time to rectify the situation. I guess we would look to you though on situations like this, like all of us could sit up here and make an educated guess how long you should allow someone to have to mow their lawn.
Yeah, it's
Little
a
different.
little bit different in every communicable disease, so I don't think we can be prescriptive about that, honestly. Yeah.
Well, and so maybe Chris, and we can get in the weeds on this at another point, but
Yeah.
maybe it is something as simple as the health department is required to provide notice, and whatever the appropriate time is for the cure, so to speak, to that, would be associated with it. So if it's something imminent, you're not gonna give them 3 weeks to go deal with the issue. And then that way we do have a generic
Absolutely.
path to deal with any communicable disease moving forward.
I'm clear.
And
Thank
I-
you.
I was gonna say, I think this, the more, I need to reflect a second, because I'm not good on municipal fines. I mow my grass, so I've never had to get a letter, so. But I think this also sets the table for you as a health department going forward. It doesn't, I mean, to my knowledge, it doesn't sound like you've mentioned this before, but you hear in the news about people across the country intentionally demanding no customers that wear a mask, these intentional no mask places, whether it be a barber shop or a restaurant. And to my knowledge, you don't have that yet in Fishers, but should that become a thing, then now you've got a way to handle it uniformly across the board. No one's feeling intentionally singled out. This is, whatever your decision is, this is the uniform plan, this is how it will proceed in the city of Fishers. And I think that's a very equitable way to go through, people who are not bad actors, just didn't know,
Right.
correct that action, great. People who are intentionally violating this will have to follow the same course of action. I think that will be helpful for you guys.
All right?
That's all we got.
Questions? Any questions from the board? I assume this is a open mic in the sense of any questions about any topic? Okay. Any questions for Monica or Dr. Lane? Okay, seeing none, we will move on to any unfinished or new business. Chris, is there any? Seeing that there is no unfinished or new business, is there a motion to adjourn the meeting?
Motion.
Motion, is there a second?
Second.
Motion.
Okay.
Second.
All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Meeting adjourned, thank you.
Aye.